Tesla's Investor Day is only 4 days away as I record this. So what time is it? Well, it's speculation time, of course. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So first of all, this shirt was obviously the shirt that I had to wear today because we're just going to be speculating today. It's not going to be a question of if I'm wrong or / we're wrong, and I'll explain that in just a second, but how much we're wrong. Anyway, if you enjoy this shirt and you want to support the channel, you can find a link to this in the description. It's the merch store. There's a whole bunch of other stuff too if you want to check it out. So a couple of notes here. Number one, this is a little bit of a hive collective mind sort of thing. I asked my Patreon members on Discord to help me out with ideas for this, and they chipped in, and we came up with a really interesting list of possibilities, from things that are almost certain to things that are way, way out there, and who knows if they'll even have any possibility of happening, but it's worth mentioning. But in light of that, what I'm going to do is list out ideas and explain them a little bit, and then attach percentage chance of them happening to that. So it'll go from 99.9% because basically it's speculation, so you can never be 100% sure. But anyway, things that I'm, almost completely sure about, to things that have like 5 or 10% chance of happening. The second note here is that Elon Musk has talked about this being an investor day for all of the investors on planet Earth, much more than Tesla. So what that means is I believe Elon Musk in particular is going to focus on the big picture, and there's a lot of goings on and mechanics and things like that that are happening at Tesla that are very, very important day to day and everything, but they probably won't be mentioned in the talk on Investor Day. So what we're specifically talking about here today is things that will be mentioned during the Investor Day presentation by Elon Musk, potentially Zach Kirkhorn, potentially Martin Vieja. Other people might be getting up during this as well, of course, and talking. But anyway, so it's things that will actually be discussed, not things that are going on at Tesla, because of course there's a lot of stuff going on at Tesla that just can't be mentioned. It's way too much to fit into an hour and a half presentation. And finally, as the master plan part 3 and, changing the world is kind of the theme of this Investor Day presentation and meeting, I think that there will be a lot of things that will be glossed over relatively quickly that are super, super important, but that are not the kind of poppy thing that people in general will get and understand. So, just take all that. That's how I'm sort of organizing this and the percent chance of things being talked about. And finally, before I begin, I want to make a huge shout out to Stephen Mark Ryan today from Solving the Money Problem. I was actually going to do a video today on the Wendover Productions, Tesla teardown. I mean, the ridiculous video that apparently is like number 20 on YouTube right now. My goodness. It is so bad that I couldn't even watch 30 or 40 seconds of it without being ready to vomit in my mouth. So anyway, I was going to submit myself to actually doing that video today and talking about all of that garbage and having to argue with him. But Stephen Mark Ryan spent an hour taking the video down. So I feel like I don't have to do that anymore. If you guys really, really want me to do it, then I'll consider doing another takedown. But I feel like, SMR did a great job of that. So anyway, thank you so much, because I can focus on something positive and more fun today. All right, without further ado, the number one thing that they are going to talk about with, I think, 99.9% certainty, and more than likely it will be Zach Kirkhorn that will talk about this, is financials, potentially Martin Vieja as well, but I think Zach Kirkhorn would be the logical choice. I believe that they are going to do this efficiently. This is not the really big focus, even though it is Investor Day, and even though probably a lot of the big whale investors will be there, I think that they're going to get through that. It's a necessity that they're going to have to talk about that because it's Investor Day, but they're going to get through that as quickly as possible because that's really not the focus of this particular meeting. Another thing that I'm giving about 99% certainty is the new refreshed Model 3 that's going to be coming out. It could be called the Project Highland Model 3. It might actually be called the Model Pi, as Connecting the Dots thinks it will be at this point. So it might be different enough from Model 3 that it might be Model 3.14159. Right. So call it Model Pi, which is a little bit better than Model 3, potentially. Anyway, so it could be called Project Highland Model 3. It could be called Model 3 2023 refresh, could be called Model Pi, something like that. But the fact that we have seen a lot of evidence that there is a new version of the Model 3 out, and it's a pretty substantial upgrade after 5 years since the original was introduced, that will be discussed during Investor Day. So 99% odds I'm giving that. Next up, speaking of Project Highland, I'm giving 80% odds that they will talk about Gen 3 manufacturing. And, you know, if you've looked at some videos, again, Connecting the Dots did a really, really good one about this. But basically that Highland Park was Ford's Model T production factory where they talked about how to ramp up to very large scale. And so calling something Project Highland from Tesla's point of view, and particularly from Elon Musk, who is a very, very big, you know, history fan and Ford fan, that more than likely what they will talk about is how they're going to revamp their factories in order to mass produce vehicles more efficiently. And again, I'm giving this very, very good odds of happening because Elon Musk has tweeted about this and how important it is to reduce the cost of manufacture. Sandy Munro's done teardowns and stuff. He believes the Model 3 is somewhere on the $38,000 range to be able to manufacture the vehicles. And so half that is somewhere around, let's just call it $20,000 to be, you know, round numbers or something. But to get it down to $20,000 is going to require an entirely new manufacturing process. So I think the odds are very, very heavy that they will talk about that. Maybe they won't give a ton of specifics about it, but they will say that they've got this new Generation 3 manufacturing plant and it reduces X% of robots that are needed. It reduces X% of processes. And on and on and on. A bunch of stuff like that. So I give that very good odds of happening, 80%, like I said. Next up, I'm also giving 80% odds to Cybertruck being discussed, a new production timeline or an updated one saying July, August, you know, Q3 of 2023. It's going to go into limited production. Maybe some discussion about the price of the Cybertruck, you know, because for years, we haven't been able to know exactly what the price is, what the specs are, things like that. So maybe they will finally unveil some of that stuff so that we can actually go back and, you know, I've put down my deposit years ago. The likelihood that there will be a single motor version anymore is super minimal. So I think that they might discuss that. I don't know how much into the weeds they'll get, but certainly at least they will show a Cybertruck while they're there, you know, maybe drive it up on stage or something like that. So anyway, I give that very high odds, also 80% plus. And speaking of big trucks, I also give 80% that they will talk about the Tesla Semi in some extent. They may talk about how Pepsi's used it, the real world stuff that they've discovered, the range and everything. And if you haven't seen, Tesla Joy just did a video yesterday or the day before. Anyway, she did one where they ran into a Tesla semi-truck driver at a supercharging station and they talked to him and he said that he was getting real world range of 485 miles plus without it going between 100% and zero. So, you know, you can project that out to being 500 plus miles of range if you take the entire battery. So that's really, really cool. Anyway, I give, you know, reasonable odds, 80% that they will talk about the Semi as well, because again, it's very important to the future of transportation, reducing pollutants, increasing efficiency, energy efficiency of transport and things like that. So that's a very important factor too. And on to Hardware 4, I believe with 99.9% certainty that they will talk about Hardware 4 and officially introduce it for the models S and X. They have already been spotted in the wild by the Kilowatts and a bunch of other people who've taken pictures of the outside that are obviously different than previous versions. We've seen the Hardware 4, Green the Only has shown us, you know, a bunch of very high resolution pictures. So if they didn't mention this, it would be utterly shocking to me. I think that this is their official launch, but that there's been so much leaking at this point. It's like a leaky boat or something that basically we already know that this is going to happen. Now you might ask, what about the Model 3 and Model Y? I give that less than 20%, more realistically, maybe 10%. The only reason I'm giving it any real odds is that I feel like the new Model 3 or Model Pi or whatever this thing is could well have Hardware 4 in it as well. It would make sense if they're doing an entire refresh to go ahead and put Hardware 4 into that model in particular, but I don't really foresee them putting Hardware 4 into the older Model 3s or the Model Ys just yet, because number one, you need a lot of parts. You need a whole bunch of cameras. You need all of those hardware boards, but then you have to take all of these productions offline and fix them all to be able to update them so that they can take Hardware 4 stuff. You know, there's a lot of revamping involved, and I don't think that they're going to do that immediately. They may give a roadmap of like in the next 6 months or something, they will upgrade this, or they may not talk about it at all with the Model 3 and Model Y because they don't want to Osborne affect themselves, because a lot of people like me would not purchase a Model 3 or Model Y right now, knowing that Hardware 4 is coming up very soon. So they probably want to minimize the effect of that. Again, the general public probably doesn't know about that, so they can keep selling to the general public. But I don't think that they're going to want to announce a specific timeline for Hardware 4 in the Model 3s and Model Ys until they're actually rolling out of the production line. So if after Investor Day you hear about productions going offline for Model Y for a week or two or something, that would probably be when Hardware 4 is going to roll out. And speaking of production, I give 90% that they are going to announce a new factory and 80% that that will be in Mexico somewhere. And that factory, by the way, could very well be for their Generation 3 car, or Model TOW, as Connecting the Dots and other people are calling it. As for announcing that on Investor Day, the Model TOW, 75% odds. I think there's a better than even chance that they will talk about the Model TOW, but also because it has to do with mass scaling, right? So Master Plan Part 3, which we're going to get to in just a minute, is all about mass scaling. And if you want to mass scale, you have to have a car that you can produce a lot of that's relatively inexpensive. And that's what that Gen 3 car should be. If they do decide to talk about that car, I give 2/3 odds or 67% odds that they will actually talk about single casting that car. So the entire underbody, and actually Connecting the Dots is talking about the upper body as a piece as well, which would be really amazing. But anyway, at least the underbody, the whole thing will be one single casting, and there will be rails or something to hold a structural battery pack in place for that vehicle. I've talked about that before, so you have to multiply your odds out. So if they talk about this Gen 3 Model TOW vehicle, I give it 2/3 odds that they will also talk about single casting the entire underbody of that vehicle. As for discussing all of the specs and the exact timeline of the release of that car, I only give that 20% odds on Investor Day. So I think if they talk about it, it's going to be more aspirational. This is what's coming. They're not going to say exactly what date it's going to be released on. And so let's get on to Master Plan Part 3 as a whole. Talking about Master Plan Part 3, I'm giving 99.99% odds, since Elon Musk has basically already told us that's what he's going to talk about. He said it's done. He said he's excited to talk about it. It's supposed to happen on Investor Day. So again, can't give it 100% because it's in the future, but I think the odds are incredibly high that he himself, Elon Musk, will lay out Master Plan Part 3, probably with, an actual document that will come with it, and certainly with like 4 or 5 finishing up bullet points that will encapsulate the entire thing. Will Master Plan Part 3 talk about scaling energy? Yes, I give that 99% odds that it will. Will it talk about getting into mining and refining? Yes, I give that 90% odds that they will talk about how to scale up mining and refining, and they will also probably bring the Boring Company in on that as well, because he's already said that he's probably going to bring in the Boring Company and SpaceX. Don't know about Neuralink, but at least those two companies will probably also be mentioned. Will he discuss production techniques to allow mass scaling of automobile production? Yes, I give that about 75% odds. Already sort of mentioned that previously, but I think it does roll into the Master Plan Part 3, so it's worth re-mentioning that. Will he talk about production techniques for mass scaling the production of batteries? Also, yes, I give that 75% odds of also happening. And here's an interesting left field idea that I got from some of my Patreon patrons, and that is the idea of licensing this said scalable production technology and techniques to other manufacturers. So that's something that I hadn't really thought of. I'm only going to give it about 25% chance of happening, or at least being mentioned at this point. Not that they couldn't do that in the future, but of being mentioned on Investor Day, I'm only giving it like 1/4 odds. Next up, if we're going to talk about the extreme scaling of production and storage of energy, we have to talk about vehicle to grid with Tesla's vehicles. Remember, these things have 70, 100 kilowatt hour, batteries, these gigantic batteries in them. And I don't know if they're going to talk about it for previous vehicles and sort of software unlock that. I don't know about that because the battery technology might not be good enough. But I think there's a really high degree likelihood, 70% odds, that they will talk about enabling vehicle to grid, at least on vehicles that they are producing in the future. So that will be absolutely huge. Again, if you have the right technology, the right connectors in your house, you could plug your house in with an 80 kilowatt hour battery, and you could power that for a long period of time, depending on what devices you're running and things like that. So you could run your house for a long time, or you could do auto bidder, where you could actually pull in energy at cheap times or pull it from your roof and solar and then sell it to the grid at other times. So there's a lot of potential, and the batteries in these vehicles are absolutely monstrous, which means when you're not using them, they could be a very effective, diffuse way of storing energy. And that could be a really solid way of helping to achieve extreme scale in production and storage, in particular of energy. Next up, will Elon talk about autonomy and robo-taxis? I give that about 2/3 or 67% odds that he will. That is a really, really important part of extreme scaling, is to reduce the amount of vehicles that need to be produced. And by having the vehicles be, autonomous and being able to drive around and pick people up and do things, they can be utilized like 75 or 80% of the time instead of 5 or 10% of the time like normal cars are. So that is a really important thing. Will he attach a specific timeline to that? I think that's less likely by a long shot. So again, there's a lot of moving pieces involved, not just the technology, but also regulatory hurdles and things like that. So, he may have learned his lesson. Maybe he hasn't. Maybe he'll say by the end of 2023, I don't know. But I have a feeling he will just say, in the future, we are going to get to this, and that's very important, and it's an important part of Master Plan Part 3. Speaking of scaling, what about scaling labor and the Tesla bot? I give it about 67% odds, again, about 2/3 odds that they will actually talk about that. Elon in particular will talk about Tesla bot. In fact, actually, I think mentioning it as part of Master Plan Part 3 is more like 90% odds, right? He's talked about this before, that you need expansion of the labor pool, and what better than an autonomous robot to expand labor and be able to increase the amount of labor that can be produced by the global population. As for a demo of Tesla bot actually doing something useful in one of Tesla's factories, I give that about a coin flip, right? 50-50 odds that they will show that. I think it'd be really cool. It's been 5 months since they had AI Day 2, and they've been very, very quiet about Tesla bot. So this would be a really good time for them to show the Tesla bot doing something interesting. And now it could be a live demo actually up on stage with them, or they could just have a video of it doing something, in one of the production cells, moving pieces around or something, or actually being part of the useful production pipeline that's going on and building some cars. That would be a really amazing and cool demonstration. And again, I'm giving it about 50-50 odds that they will actually do that during the Investor Day. All right, so widening the net a little bit, is he going to talk about SpaceX and Boring Company? I give that better than 50-50 odds, maybe 60% that he's going to talk about that, maybe even more than that for SpaceX in particular, because he has mentioned that that is going to be part of Master Plan Part 3. Will Elon mention SpaceX's Starlink and its potential to change the globe and the way information is passed around and everything? Yeah, I give that about 75 or 80% odds. I think that's very, very likely that he'll talk about that. Will Elon announce a new tunneling project for the Boring Company? Maybe Austin itself? I give that about a 1/3 or 33% chance odds of happening. So it could happen. I'm giving it less than 50-50, but he could announce that as part, again, of this sort of changing the world thing. So it is possible that that could happen. It also might happen at a different time than Investor Day. Will Tesla talk about getting into mining and refining? I give that about 90% odds. And will they talk about using the Boring Company tunneling project things to actually help with that? That I give less odds, maybe 33% odds, so like 1/3 chance that they'll do that. But I think it's very, very likely, of course, that Tesla will talk about getting into mining and refining, just because, again, they have to increase the scale. Not that they will be the only ones doing this, but that they're going to lend a helping hand to bring up the scale of this stuff that's being mined and refined, because it's necessary in order to be able to transition the world to sustainable energy on a mass scale that Elon is definitely going to be talking about with Master Plan Part 3. And finally, with connections, will Neuralink be mentioned? I only give that about 20% odds. That is a little bit of an oddball thing. I mean, obviously it's important for the future for people who have, problems like, nerve problems and things like that. And it's also potentially part of the future for all of us to increase the bandwidth at which we're able to transfer data back and forth from computers. But I don't know if it has an awful lot of direct impact on what's going on with Investor Day Part 3 and extreme scaling, so I'm only giving it about 20% odds of being mentioned in his talk. It might just be mentioned in passing, like I have these companies and one of them is Neuralink. That might be the extent of the mention during this particular presentation. And to end off, let's get really, really wildly speculative and talk about a few more out there ideas. Number one, could Tesla talk about housing? Housing is a huge need, and creating houses in a more efficient, modern manner, something like what Boxable is doing and some other companies, is very, very important. I'm only giving like 10 to 20% odds that Elon will mention that. Again, it might be sort of wrapped up into Master Plan Part 3 in terms of construction and things like that. So it could be there, but I think him particularly calling attention to that on Investor Day is relatively low odds, but it would be really intriguing if he does. Now, things like HVAC units and stuff like that, which can transform the way that houses are cooled and heated. So that actually could be something, and I think there's higher odds that that would be talked about, maybe 25%. Will Elon Musk talk about going to Mars? I give that about a 20% odds of happening. That could actually happen. If it does, I think that he actually might potentially discuss the first payload on the first Starship suborbital flight. It would be really cool if it was the Cybertruck with a Tesla bot prototype driving it. I think that would be kind of awesome. Now, it won't get into orbit if it's the first prototype because it's going to be a suborbital trajectory, but still, it would be a pretty darn cool, payload rather than a big wheel of cheese or a block of cement. Why not put a Cybertruck prototype and a Tesla bot prototype in there? And you could get some really cool pictures from orbit, just like we did with Starman in the Roadster. Next up, to get really out there, we could be talking about Tesla announcing a mega solar project, something along the lines of 100 square miles of solar in the United States and potentially Canada. This is something that Elon Musk has mentioned before, that 100 square miles would power the United States. So it does seem quite reasonable that this is something that they could talk about. Maybe it wouldn't be one 100 square mile, solar panel farm. It would be something that would be spread out, maybe one in Nevada, one in Texas, one in like Saskatchewan or something like that, one sort of in Kansas, just spread it out across the United States and parts of Canada so that the distribution is easier. This is, something I'm only giving like 10 or 15% odds of actually happening, but it would be the kind of like throw down the gauntlet moment that Tesla could do if they really wanted to say to everybody else, we are serious about mass scale and about changing the nature of energy production and storage in the world. We're going to start in the United States and we'll see where we go from there. So anyway, I'm not giving it high odds of happening, but it's the kind of like high risk, high reward, amazing thing that Tesla could do with their $20+ billion of cash that they have on hand. They could just go ahead and spend a few $1 billion making this happen. And that would be mighty cool if it actually did happen. And finally, is Elon going to talk about X.com, the holding company that could hold Tesla and Twitter and SpaceX and the Boring Company and Neuralink? I only give that about 10% chance of him talking about it, although it is very important to his vision of the future and sort of wrapping all of this stuff up so that you can get these synergies. There's a lot of complexity in actually officially putting all of these different entities, some of them public, some private, into the same mega holding company. So I don't know that he'll talk about it. I'm only giving it 10% odds, but it is a possibility that he might do something like that. All right, so that's what my Patreon patrons and I have come up with, from the very, very likely to happen to the very unlikely, but super cool if it did happen kind of stuff. I'm sure we have missed a bunch of things. If we did, please do let us know in the comments what you think is likely or even unlikely to happen. And of course, if you think that some of the stuff we mentioned is wholly unlikely to happen, let us know that as well, because of course that's all part of the game. And of course, we'll all tune in on March 1st and we'll, give ourselves a thumbs up or a pat on the back for things that we got right, and we'll try to ignore the stuff that we got wrong. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video and found it fun and thought-provoking, please do like it so other people can find it, especially before Investor Day. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge, gigantic shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you all so much. A lot of this video is your input, and I truly appreciate it. And of course, if you want to join the team, just check out the link in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have Tesla Bot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, Success is a Possible Outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on. So check it out. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.